Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Markwit, and in this video I want to talk to you guys about modular building and just the ideas behind creating modular geometry. So I scoured the internet for some images. I have some on my own content. I want to give you guys a couple examples of exactly what is modular building and why you would want to do it. So we're not going to get too much into actually building the assets themselves. Those will be other videos, but this video will show us that. So let me start off with some of these images that I have here. This is just a simple image that I found on the internet of literally the most basic idea when it comes to modular building. So in this particular case, you see that this individual has created several assets, but you could literally just create this one wall piece and one pillar piece and create any kind of set of objects that you want out of them. In fact, if we look at this other image here, you can see all of the different things that you can create out of that. So we can create all these different shapes just using a pillar that is set every so often, right, in between with walls, right? And we can go any direction we want, and you can see all the different things. So that's the absolute easiest, simplest form. Now, modular geometry can get a lot more complex, but like I said, these images are just to help you see the simplest idea. So in this image, this is something you'll see a lot in racing games or driving games. They'll start creating panels, right? In this case, you have sidewalks, and you have all these different setups, right? Depending on what kind of intersection they are, if it's a curved road, and how all of these things line up with each other. So it doesn't always have to be full-on 3D. It could be things like, you know, your 2D planes, your, in this case, the road, and so on, right? But here's another example that we kind of see right here where there's just three pieces. Okay, so we have this piece, this one without a vent, with a vent, and then the curved piece. And you can see that as they rotate the curved piece and they move the different pieces around, you can get a fairly unique look. In fact, you can do an entire building of ventilation systems just using these three pieces. So you just have to be smart about how your objects line up and whatever. But remember, these are all easy ones. And I'm starting to get more complex as I show, because I really kind of want you guys to have a better understanding of what it means to be a modular piece. And then we'll start seeing some more complex ones. So this one takes it up a notch, right? As we can see that we have a ton of different pipes. Now this might take a while, of course, to create, but the amount of different things you can do with these pipes and whatever directions you want to go with them is just insane, right? So we can even see that there's slight variations between, say, you know, this one has four different angles coming out of it. Same thing as this one. This one's just a little bit longer, right? So depending on which angle you want your pipes to move, you can rotate them, place them in there. You got different gauges, things like that. This can take, you know, a ton of, it doesn't take, I should say, it doesn't take a ton of time to make these assets, but you can literally populate an entire scene with these and it'll just feel natural and unique, right? So it's all about the Lego idea, right? Understand modular building more of like a Lego piece concept. Now this one shows in this image that you don't always have to have like simple ways of connecting. In this case, they made it so that the texture was done in such a way they can even line it up so it comes into a little bit more of a complex lineup. It's obviously easier to make sure that your pieces are perfectly straight when they line up each other, but this is a unique take on that, helping you guys understand that it's not always as simple as just lining two things up side by side. In this case, this particular artist thought that they would take their texture and create it in such a way that it could just be kind of interchanged as the bricks slid into the different facets of each of the different modular pieces. Now, this is where things get a little bit more complex and a little bit more realistic when it comes to larger games. There really are no games nowadays that don't use modular building. You just do not have the time to build everything as an individual separate object. It just can never happen. So you can see here that these are some modular pieces that build a building, and these are the different types of windows that you can swap out. You have two different types of trim. So you can see this is kind of more of a brick trim, more of a concrete trim, and then we have these pieces that separate the windows. So right here, the windows themselves don't really have anything in between them. They look weird when you link them directly, but if you were to put something like this in between them, and we'll see that in the next image, right, now we can create the entire building. So here are those long pieces, right? Here are those concrete trim. Here is the brick trim, another concrete trim up here, and the different windows, and you can see that they're separated by those long pieces in the trim. So this entire building is nothing but modular pieces. You can even see how this particular artist in this image kind of points those things out, right? So we can go back to this and see the different types of trim, the pieces, and so on, and how they just all snap together and create all these different pieces, right? So this is an entire building, And you can create multiple buildings and have them look completely different, right? Maybe you take the whole thing and just make the whole thing out of concrete instead of the brick, or put this concrete part towards the top and the brick on the bottom and so on, right? Just out of these pieces. Okay, so there's a lot of different options. Now this is starting to get even more complex. You can see that in some cases with modular building, they get very, very kind of granular on how the changes they made. Now this course could be done if you know about texturing and decals. A lot of these things can be done in decals and overlays, but you can see that they do have slight changes between some of the geometry, and then you can just literally swap out each one of these pieces to fit into the larger scene and create this very unique look of a building, even though it really is just a bunch of modular pieces. Now, this last part I just want to quickly mention, and I'm going to get into some other modular building here, but this is an image where a particular artist shows that in some cases, if you have painted metal, all you have to do to make something modular, right, is you can do it in the texture, just change the color. So sometimes you got to understand how the texturing can also affect modular things. So you have modular geometry and modular texturing. So in this case, of course, you can just swap out the paint to be any color you want and just have a bevy of different looks for whatever object it's going to be on. Now this shows this same artist, right, and they were showing that they lined up all of their grout lines between different types of textures. Why? Well, this way they can just swap out a texture and have a completely different look without having to adjust the UVs at all. This way they can make things just fit exactly in the corners, so we don't have any part of a brick showing or part of a tile showing or something. It just looks real nice. So the texture's unwrapped perfectly. But then when they swap it out, because it lines up, the grout lines line up, it's going to look perfect when it gets swapped out. So these are things that you can think ahead. If you understand these ideas and you use these concepts, you can really create art fast with the least amount of work possible. Now this is more or less the idea behind creating kind of trim or even strip texturing, which is something you'll learn in the game texturing class. But as we can see here, they even line up all the other different pieces. And so in this case, if you have a building that's made out of metal, and if you even read this part up here, artist basically says, well, you can swap out the metal for the concrete and get a completely different look with the building because all the things line up. The trim lines up with the trim on this side, right? Some part of the wall lines up over here, so on and so forth. And then the decorations that are unique to the different textures are just on the top here. So that's another way that they do it. And you can see right here in this image, this is the same building 3 times, but with some texture swaps. So you can see that this is an example of taking some of the same textures that are used up here, putting them down here. So you have like stone, you have this brown wood, and kind of like a normal, well, wood, but more of a plaster in between. And you can just mix and match them. So you can see how these are 3 completely different looking buildings because the textures were swapped. And then lastly, this is an awesome image. This is that same artist that I was showing you before and how he swapped his different textures out, and you can see how it changes. So he changed the color of them. You can see it's like the green metal, and then there's a white tile there or whatever. It's the same exact texture, just changed the color. But look how much of a different look you can get just by swapping textures, right? And that's really the idea behind modular building. So let me show you some more actual pieces, and then we'll show some in-game content. So let me minimize all of this, and this is something that I created quite a while ago, actually, based off of the original Dead Space game. There's a particular scene in the game, and I wanted to see if I can create that same effect and just do these modular pieces. You can basically create any size room you want, or any shape room for that matter, as long as it has 90-degree angles, with outer corners, as you can see here. And I have each of these pieces of geometry as a separate color, but your inner corner here, and then 2 kind of lengthwise pieces. So your wall pieces, which is just kind of a generic wall, and then this one kind of has a window. So this allows you to kind of see into it, and then you can put stuff inside here or whatever. You can even see on this particular piece of geometry, I have these hidden walls. So just in case you ever line it up with the windows, it doesn't look out into nothingness, right? So whenever you have windows lined up against the edge of one of these non-windowed ones, it will automatically have that piece. So I had to think about that as I was creating, but they all snap in the same way. So you kind of see that this light, which in the game, these were lights, these shapes that we can see right here, these were lights, and you can see it repeating in every one of my shapes. And so I used that as the transition piece. So that was actually the first thing I modeled, and then I built everything from there. So you can see how everything will snap to those corners. So this new piece will snap there, and so on. If I take a look at this other corner piece, you can see the same thing, right? The ends of every one of the pieces is the same because they always snap into one of these light fixtures. Now, of course, we have to think about how it wraps around, right? The inner piece you can see is a lot smaller, while the outer piece is a lot bigger, including part of the roofing, right? So I had to think about it like that. And you can also see here that this is an easy modular piece too. We're like a catwalk, right? Just two objects. You can literally take these and put them in any direction of the object. And if we were to say turn on our snap tool here, right, and make sure that we're on vertex, and I can snap, if I wanted to snap, say from here and just holding down shift and snap there, and then go up a couple of, you know, pieces, number of copies, boom, you can create this long catwalk. And of course I can then grab this mirror on the other side and so on. So that's really saving me a ton of time. Now of course you model it, then you unwrap it, then you texture it, and then you build your scene. It usually doesn't make a lot of sense to build a tiny scene out of finished geometry, but you get the idea, right? And so these pieces, as I said before, can create an entire room. I'll give you an example. I actually built it over here. So I built an entire room with these kind of shapes, and you can see how all these different shapes are in here. I'm actually just going to delete some of these end ones here just so we can see into it a little bit, right? So let me click on this and we'll just zoom out just a bit and get a better look. But you can kind of see how we have the, whoops, there we go. We have the outer corner and then an inner corner, and then it goes back into another inner corner. It can really be any shape you want. And you can see right here that I have a blank wall with a whole bunch of windowed walls side by side by side. Whoops, sorry, I keep zooming out there on you guys. We're seeing the back faces, okay? But there you go, right? So we're just kind of getting a nice idea of how these things can snap together and look nice. As I said before, you know, as long as you have your snap tool on, you're snapping your vertices, making sure the edges line up. Of course, it takes a little bit of thought, right? I mean, this is not, you don't just throw the stuff together. It does take a little bit of thought of lining things up and so on. But once you got it down, oh my goodness, you save yourself so much time. You can create so much geometry. And that's the thing about architecture, is it repeats over and over again. So it's great, especially when it comes to man-made things. Of course, you can modular build with forests and other things. Of course, that will just be the same object rotated in different ways, scaled slightly, and so on. So organic stuff kind of has an effect like that, but architecture can be repeated over and over again. So lastly, I wanted to show you in this video is this is actually Unreal Tournament 4. So with the new Unreal Engine, you can actually download Unreal Tournament, and this is a level within the editor, as we can see here. And the great thing is, it has a pretty cool look, but the really great thing about this is it's so modularly built, which basically if I start clicking on objects, you can kind of see how that same pipe is, you know, this pipe that's over here and so on, but it's built out of all these tiny little pieces like, you know, like Legos. I mean, look at this. Every time I select something, you can see that it's not just, even though it gives it this appearance of this giant building with all this crazy stuff going on it, they just built it out of a bunch of modular pieces, and they use it throughout the entire level. So it's, you know, in some cases it serves as the outside of this really cool looking building, but then you can fly into here and see the same kind of things going on, right? We can see little pieces of pipe that are being used over and over again. So this artist came up with so many pieces of geometry and then just repurposed them over and over again for different things. I've even seen things that would be like a whole doorway, right? So this entire kind of archway could be the same piece of geometry that's like a handle on a door somewhere. If you're really smart with how you're doing your modular building, you can really just build the least amount of geometry possible and have it rotated and moved in such a way that we can really get all of these different modular pieces that look unique. Now, some objects are bigger than others. This one looks like it's grouped, so it is a bunch of things, but it could easily have been single objects and so on. But you can kind of see this is probably the same object we'd see outside, but scaled 10 times bigger when we look up on the building. It's just really smart. So this shape right here is the same shape you're seeing. Whoops, not on that, but here, right? These are the same shapes. Okay, they don't give the same effect when you're looking at them, but you do kind of see how this is real simple. So instead of creating all of this super unique geometry, we're just creating these same pieces over and over again. Once again, architecture repeats, right? We see the same panel over and over and over again, and it makes sense. Right? So hopefully this helps you guys understand a little bit about modular building. I want you guys to think hard about how you want to create this stuff. What is the least amount of geometry you can create, but with the greatest effect? And that doesn't mean you make the object simple. A lot of times your modular pieces can be fairly complex. This is not saying do a couple of boxes and make it fit. You can see here that even though in some cases geometry looks simple, there's so much variety in here. Right, so there is a lot of modular pieces. They weren't lazy here. They do have a ton of different pieces, but they were able to create this very beautiful environment based off of a certain look, a certain theme. So once again, as I said before, hopefully this helps you guys understand a bit about modular building. So start creating your own content, start looking into that, planning it out, and it'll save you guys a lot of time. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.